On the morning of August 1st, 1966, shots ring out from the observation deck of the clock tower on the University of Texas campus. It marks the infamous beginning of the modern era of mass shootings in America.
I'm Sarah Ferris, true crime podcaster.
And I'm Catherine Schweit, the former head of the FBI's active shooter program.
And you're listening to Stop the Killing. Welcome back to part 2 of our special sort of deep dive into the Oxford school shooter and the background that led up to that shooting. So, Catherine, do you want to just give us a little bit of a catch up on what we covered last episode? And if you haven't listened, obviously go back to the episode before this.
Go back and listen. There was a fantastic report that was put together trying to compile as best they could the school records, essentially, of the student who was the shooter. This is a shooter who was in 10th grade, 15 years old, when he killed 4 people. I can say murdered because he's pled guilty. 4 people in his school and also pled guilty to terrorism. He's in jail. His parents are charged with involuntary manslaughter, already convicted. The school district, Oxford High School District, very concerned, of course, about what they knew, what they didn't know, and a lot of after-action work done to pull together what they knew about the shooting, who knew what about this, what law enforcement had. And this particular section of it, which is available to the public, this particular section is about what did we know at the school about his academic performance, his demeanor, and things like that. And they went all the way back to when he started in 4th grade. So we talked about that on the first part. If you didn't hear it, maybe go back and find out. But now we're going to be in the school year where the shooting occurs. And that is in his 10th grade. So that's what I want to talk about today, Sarah. What do you want to talk about?
I'm all ears.
So first of all, the report is segmented in different sections. So I'll try to just summarize as I go. The first section about his 10th grade is about his demeanor, right? And remember, this is the 21-22 school year. Schools are just beginning to come out of COVID. And as you might recall, if you heard earlier, the shooter struggled during the COVID time period, as all students did. So they did interview some teachers. Well, I'll say this, law enforcement interviewed some teachers. Depositions were done on some teachers. There's legal actions involved here. So some of it is why it's come out in civil actions. There were 3 teachers who were interviewed when a lawsuit was filed, and the teachers provided this type of information. One teacher said the shooter was quiet but engaged in her history class. Another teacher said that assignments were turned in, student was earning decent grades, very contradictory to what we'd heard before. Another teacher said that in law enforcement and in depositions, the shooter was quiet, unremarkable, did not speak much in my class, did not engage much with the classmates. Instead, I saw him writing in a journal. I tried to look at what he wrote. I wasn't able to see it. Chemistry teacher says he struck up a conversation with the shooter about the journal, and the shooter said he just wanted to write a book. So they said, okay, that's fine. Another teacher said he had seen the shooter drawing cartoon images of guns. Several of the students' classmates were spoken to. Records from law enforcement indicate that the students thought the shooter was quiet. He didn't have many friends. One time, a student addressed the shooter by name, and the shooter seemed surprised that the student even knew who he was by name.
Mm-hmm.
They thought that the shooter was constantly writing in this journal, but he didn't share it with anybody. He protected it from view, some of the other students said. Another student recalled the shooter was very talkative. Can imagine, I see Sarah's head turning.
Yeah, that's an interesting turn of events. Like that doesn't sit with what we've just been hearing.
And so imagine, here's how fascinating the conversation was to have a conversation with that student. The student said, well, he was pretty talkative and he was pretty normal. But then sometimes he talked about how useless life is. And the shooter said he just didn't seem to care. The shooter didn't seem to care. One day the shooter was in class talking about what they wanted for Christmas, and the shooter talked about getting a new gun. He was very excited about that.
Wow. A little bit of leakage going on. Snap.
So-
Snap, snap,
Right.
snap. We're both thinking the same thing. It's almost the first time that we've heard him interact with any peer,
Right.
anyone of his age that has had a relationship other than just thinking he's quiet. And
Right. And the teachers have reported he doesn't really have a lot of friends. He doesn't talk to a lot of people.
So it's quite significant that he's got one person that he has actually interacted with.
And that student gets the leakage. According to the student in class, one day the shooter and others talked about what they wanted for Christmas, and the shooter talked about getting a new gun, which he was excited about. How many students heard that conversation? And how many students reported it?
Yeah. Part of me is like trying to process whether or not that is a cultural thing where people would be like, it's okay that, that wouldn't be something that would stick out, that a 15-year-old's getting a gun in perhaps the US. I mean, certainly if that happened here, it would be something that would be a bit of ears prick up, very unusual.
Well,
but what's your feeling on that?
Say, you can't get a gun as a gift when you're 15. It's against the law.
Right. And
right?
kids would know that.
Right. Now, this is Michigan. I grew up in Michigan, right? Detroit is where I was born. In Michigan, there's a big hunting crowd, as there are in other states. It's deer season. Everybody takes the first day of deer season off and they go off to get their deer. And that's really popular, and then this is pheasant season and then this is whatever. So could have been interpreted as I'm getting a new hunting rifle.
Right.
Even though he lives in kind of a really affluent, I would call it affluent suburban area, those people go hunting. You take a couple of days off and you go hunting with your parents. And if you come from a hunting family, you do that. I did not. I was not a hunter growing up, but I knew plenty of people who were gone the first day of deer season and they were gone from school and they were using rifles or shotguns, right? So this wasn't, I'm getting a new shotgun. I'm getting a new hunting rifle. He told several people, I'm getting a gun for Christmas. I'm excited about it. A gun for Christmas is not necessarily, hunting season.
But also, I think you put that together with the fact that he's not perceived as a violent student. He's not perceived as a violent person in the school. He's not perceived as a threat to the other children. So you lay that on top of that.
Yeah, and I would say this. Why did he tell them that?
Right. Yeah.
Was he trying to impress them?
Mm-hmm.
And if the student said that to a teacher, or to a counselor or the principal or anybody else you run into, the school resource officer, whoever, and you said, so-and-so over here said he's getting a new gun for Christmas and he's really excited about it. As an adult, I would say a little bit more information. Maybe it's a hunting rifle or something, but why not ask him about that or ask his parents about that? And
But of course, we don't know that information got back to any adult. This was information that just was given to the children, right? The other kids.
But you know what? And what would a kid say? What would a kid say? If I said, why didn't you tell somebody? What would a kid say? I'm not going to get him in trouble. I'm not running to the principal's office to get the guy in trouble. Right? But it is okay to run to the principal's office or wherever and to say, this doesn't sound right. I mean, it was enough that the student remembered it, right?
Did they have an anonymous reporting system in their school, by the way?
In Michigan, they have okay to say. It's available to anybody and everybody. I love that you asked me that question. And this group doing the evaluations of things in a separate section evaluated all the stuff that came in on okay to say, and there was nothing relevant to this subject.
Okay.
To the shooter.
Right.
So any one of these students, which I love that you brought that up, could have gone on to their okay to say app and just made an anonymous report and say, maybe this is a hunting gun, but it was just kind of weird that he mentioned this when we were asking about what we were, looking forward to for Christmas.
The value of an anonymous reporting system.
Very much so. Very much so. Right. So there, my hackles like. So the report then turns to academic performance and says that at the time of the shooting, the student's grades were 2 failing. He was failing geometry and Spanish. He was getting C-ish in a business class and a language class, an A in communications as improv, and D in chemistry. So not super great, right? And beginning in early November, shooting occurs on November 30th. Beginning in early November, records indicate that the shooter completely stopped doing work in language arts and Spanish. Completely. That's why he was getting a failing grade. The other one is getting a C-. His records show that in the classes, he submitted incomplete assignments and didn't do any of the work. And for 2 weeks in geometry, he turned nothing in. 2 weeks. The teachers in the class were reviewing the incomplete work and recording that he didn't submit any of the assignments. And that's why he was getting a failing grade. So they were aware that he was not meeting any of those requirements. So under their grading system, right, what they call an E is failing. And he was getting failing grades. But what were they able to do? So they talked to the language arts teacher who said, hey, in the beginning of the school year, he was doing great. He turned in stuff. But then starting November 4th, he had 7 assignments that should have been done. He received an E on every one of them. So now here is a gap that appears. Here's a student who is falling off the table.
Mm-hmm. Did you say that he was failing everything except improv?
Yeah.
He was getting an A in improv.
Right.
The ability to act and mask your behavior, he was getting an A in. That's what sort of screamed out to me there.
Right.
I was like, it's a kind of skill that would get you through and keep you under the radar if you were good at it.
And that's what he was doing. And some of the things that we learned later is that at the end, he was masking his behavior. He was afraid his parents might get what he was trying to do.
Right.
So he had to convince them to help him buy the gun because he already had a plan in place.
Yeah.
Right? The language arts teacher writes, it makes a note of this. She says, when I asked why he wasn't caught up in reading, he reported, I wasn't prepared today because I wasn't prepared. Due to being unprepared, he was unable to participate in any group discussions. So this is why he got E's in all of these grades. He was given another class period to try to catch up. The next day, she entered a similar comment for a different assignment. The work was incomplete. Right. So he's not doing the work in the beginning of November 4th. It's a dramatic change, November 4th. And at the beginning of November, in the Spanish class, the shooter starts and he's getting some good grades, right? And they literally can go through every assignment. And they're like, oh, he's doing really well. He's turned in 13 assignments. He's got 6 graded assignments. But from late October into November, the shooter has 6 graded assignments in Spanish and he gets a failing grade on 5 of them. So he's doing a little bit of the Spanish, but he's not doing any of it for any points. And he's seeing that, right? And the teacher enters a comment in saying that he wasted 20 minutes of class time. She testified in her deposition that he was not doing the work like he had been. His efforts in class were less. And she recalled that she spoke to the shooter about his grades and he said, I'm going to pass the class. Don't worry about it. I'm going to get it done. Now, this is a Spanish teacher. Last episode we talked about, she had sent a note to the counselor and said, he seems to be struggling. He's failing my class. Can you please meet up with him? So she's the one who has sent the note to the counselor and said, hey, he's really struggling here. Can you do something with him? The Spanish teacher does not include in the note, hey, by the way, this shooter is failing my class. She doesn't say that. She just says, he seems to be struggling a little. Could you find time to meet up with him? So she doesn't create an urgency in her messaging. And again, I'm not criticizing. I'm just bringing to the table the facts that the actions that are seen. And it's very easy in reflection, in retrospect, to see things and see them as brighter lights than they actually are. Now, geometry is another class, right, where he is failing. And the geometry teacher is also interviewed for a deposition. He consistently fails every chapter test in geometry. I'm just going to put forward that when I went to Catholic school and I took geometry in 10th grade, I'm fairly confident the geometry nun passed me to get me out of her class. I didn't try very hard and I just hated the class, so I wanted to get out of it. Now I realize it was so basic. I could have done it if I bothered to assess. So he's failing classes in geometry and he's not trying. In every chapter test, he's failing, right? And they note in the teacher's notes, he is really struggling with math concepts. But during the 2 weeks in November, the teacher observed that the shooter is not completing assignments at all. There's no assignments going in. And she notes on one assignment that the shooter completed none of the problems on an assignment that was turned in. None of the problems. So in connection with a lesson quiz on November 10th, the shooting was on November 30th. The shooter, quote, essentially turned in a lesson quiz that was blank. In another assignment, the teacher states, it puts in the notes, that the shooter's grade was based on completion, not correctness. They didn't do any of the work. Having an hour to work on it, the shooter turned in one problem complete with proper work. The other problem had random incorrect answers with no work shown. I returned it and asked him to resubmit it on Monday. So after this bunch of failing grades, he does his last 3 assignments and he gets 100% on all of them. Right. Right. So he can do the work because like his chemistry grades are A's or E's and nothing in between, right?
Yeah.
So there's some classes, like for in chemistry, he doesn't have any big drop-offs though. Like he comes through for him on his capabilities. He kind of powers through. And in his other classes, that world history and business management and this communications as improv, in those courses he holds up. So is he just a student who's having trouble in class? He's been having trouble in class
His whole life,
right?
Yeah, his whole life.
Right. So, are there red flags there? But let me tell you a little bit about the journal, because I promised that we would get a little bit of the journal in here.
Yes.
There are some journal entries in November.
And when you say a journal, give us some context around, like, this is just a personal journal that he used to take with him? Did he fill it in at home? I kind of got the idea that he was doing it at school. No?
It wasn't a school journal, though. It was a physical journal that he was keeping by himself, and he was writing, but they had access to it.
Okay.
So it's the shooter's perspective on school. They pull these items out from the journal to share about what he thinks. So this is how he sees what's going on in school. Wow. So he writes in his journal in November that he is choosing not to do his assignments and that he expects and he hopes to be called down to the front office. So they list this evaluation lists some of these journal entries in a few of them in chronological order. But for the most part, he doesn't date the journal, but they can tell from things that he mentions where the dates are coming in.
All right.
Because of the references, maybe a particular class or something test.
Yeah.
So November 9th, he says, I spent most of my time writing in this book instead of doing stuff in class. I am failing 2 more classes and on the verge of failing 2 more. This causes my depression to be worse than it already is.
Insightful.
About 3 days later, he writes, I am already failing 3 classes and I am doing nothing to help it. I spent my entirety of Spanish class writing and doing nothing in this class. This is an entry. All one of my teachers has to do is send me to the office and I will tell them about the bird head and I can get help. 1 call and that can save lots of lives.
My spine has just gone cold. The bird head.
Which means like what? It's clearly some hallucinations. It needs more information.
We need more information for sure.
But the journal isn't seen by anybody.
Of course.
He's carrying it himself.
Yeah.
So I know that this annoys parents when I say this, possibly.
Go and look in their journals is what you're going to say, isn't it?
Children have no rights to privacy. I've said this before. I'll say it again. You are their protection. Children should not be allowed to put a lock on their bedroom door, no matter how badly they beg for it. You should have access to everything. This is not a democracy. It is important for parents to be the one who is not their kid's friend. You absolutely should not set up a situation in your kids' lives when they will not give you access to things, because you are going to respect them and you will give them the privacy that they need. And you should give them the privacy they need. And they deserve, but you are their protector. And you are not going to agree as they get older on what kind of privacy rights they may or may not have. I know parents who had big argument with their kid that was ongoing and ongoing. The dad finally came up with a hammer and took the door off the kid's bedroom door
Wow.
and said, you can get a door back when we have a better relationship. I cannot stress to you how you should trust your children, but verify. It's kind of as Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify when he was talking about the USSR. You just have to understand that you know more than your kids.
Yeah.
And if you're a parent who disrespects their privacy in ways that you shouldn't, if you read their journal and there are private thoughts in there, you can't use those against them. But, that would be being a bad parent. That's about being a bad parent.
Well, some fine lines you're jumping across here.
Well, there are fine lines. I'm saying better to be a good parent and have a view of what your child is struggling with and see if you can help them out. And of course, people don't always reach to this point. If you're a bad parent, if you read your kid's journal all the time and then you manipulate them and you use it behind their back, you're just a bad parent. Don't do that, right?
You're just a bad human as well.
Exactly. Right.
Jesus.
So the idea that, if your kid was smoking and you suspected it, you would search the room for cigarettes. If your kid was doing drugs, you would want them to not get hooked on them. You would not give them any privacy in their car or their room. Be a good criminal investigator and do that to keep your child safe. But probably more important than that is start from early on. Trust in relationships is hard to build. It's always hard to build. But if you start at a young age, and I remember saying to my daughter at a young age when I asked her, she was like 4. I'm like, did you brush your teeth? Yes, I did. Did you brush your teeth? Yes, I did. If I go upstairs and I touch your toothbrush, is it going to be wet? Now she's doing the math. Maybe not. Maybe I'll run upstairs and brush my teeth. I'll just do it again, Mom. I'm like, okay, that's a good idea, honey. Go do that. But what I was teaching her and what I said to her is, honey, if you lie to me about brushing your teeth, then when you get older, how would I know that you aren't lying to me if I say, are you smoking? And you say, no, Mom, I'm not. Why would I think you were telling me the truth if you would lie to me about something so silly as brushing your teeth? Right. So I kind of tried to build that from the beginning of, I will trust that I won't throw stuff back at you. It's kind of like telling your kids when they get to that point, if people are drinking, if you're drinking, call me and I'll come and pick you up because
exactly.
So important.
Be the safe place to fall. Even I always say, not just for you, for your friends.
Absolutely.
If you've got, friends that are in that situation, then
give me a call. I'll take care of it.
I'm a safe place to fall. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Absolutely.
And so this is where we are with regard to parents. So I know that I took a huge pause to talk about journals, but I want to tell you some other things that are in the journal entries because I think they're amazing. Because this is what someone who was seeing a journal, if the journal had dropped, this is what they would have seen. In the weekend, which would have been maybe 2 weeks before the shooting, after describing several parts of his weekend where he was happy, he says, now I'm back at school and back down the drain again. I've already committed to the shooting by not doing any of my schoolwork and practically telling the teachers to fuck off. And honestly, it feels good. After 12 years of stress and anxiety from school, it feels good just not to care anymore. He's planning the shooting. He's not doing it. He doesn't care.
Written down.
I have 2 years left until I graduate high school. I've already given up early this year and I can't take the rest of the 2 years. I'm genuinely surprised right now that none of my teachers have contacted my counselor or sent me to the office for not doing my work. I think they are doing things new to get their students to do work. Instead of going to the office, the teachers are just going to let me drop grades in hopes that I gain my sense of doing my work. Well, tough shit. I don't care about my grades no more. I'm about to shoot up the school and spend the rest of my life in prison. The last thing I could care about is my grades in school. Ugh. I'm actually hoping that I get sent down to the office. That will show them that I have given up and they will keep an eye on me. It will make them see that I am a possible shooter. So when I do my shooting, they will have something to put for motivation. I've already stopped doing schoolwork. So once the school sees my photos of guns and gun range on my Insta, they will know what is up with me.
God, he's just screaming out.
Right. He wants to get that gun. He doesn't have a gun at this point.
No.
He's trying to manipulate his parents to get a gun. Yeah. But once they see my photos of gun and gun range on my Insta, they will know what's up. So he's got a plan and he's putting it into place now. So, and they say,
interesting though, because even though he's saying, I've already made my mind up, He's still willing them to intervene and send him to the office.
Yeah, and he's like struggling back and forth. You
Isn't
can
he?
see that right there.
Yeah.
He's struggling because he wants somebody to help him,
Exactly.
but he's got a plan in place now because nobody's helping him. We hear that a lot when we hear about shooters. They'll say in interviews afterwards, they'll say, they made me do it.
Yeah.
I gave them plenty of opportunities. They made me do it.
And
he
in
made
his
me
mind, he's
right.
clearly thinking that, right? Because he's like, well, once they see that I've posted that on my Instagram, that's what they'll know. They'll know that I'm
Right.
that person.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. And so there's other communications that come. There's no indication that anybody saw the journal, but I just wanted to share that today. I know we can't plow through every single thing, but like the Spanish teacher asked at one point, in the beginning of the school year, way back in September, hey, tell us about you. One of the things that the kid wrote in his assignment to the teacher, his get to know you assignment, was that he feels terrible and his family is a mistake. Oh. It's like, she sent that to the counselor and said, this is kind of an unusual response. Mm-hmm. And the counselor's like, hey, thanks for the heads up. I'm in a senior meeting, but I'll try to catch up with them. So, the other thing that is like a triggering event is this one thing I wanted to share. One of the teachers, I think it's a Spanish teacher, she says November 10th, she testifies to this in her deposition. She noticed that the shooter had been quiet in her Spanish class and was putting in less effort. She noticed that his good friend had not been at school. She was unaware of why he was no longer in class. She testified that she had asked the shooter, how are you doing? And the shooter said, I'm okay. So she thought he was distracted, not paying attention. All he did was write his journal because he's writing a plan. He's working it out. But notice that. She noticed that the shooter's good friend had not been at school.
I mean,
the man who has no friends
has a friend that's not at school.
His support system is collapsing.
Yeah.
November 10th, 20 days before.
Mm.
And after that, his classroom work, of course, disappears, right? They don't know exactly what's been turned in and what hasn't been turned in. In retrospect, we see what's in the Google Drive. In retrospect, we see what's in the journal.
Yeah.
But just to clarify, if you don't recall, not you, anybody, but there is a gun purchased on Black Friday. And then Monday, the student is searching for ammunition online. The parents get notification of that. They don't respond to the school. The next day, the student writes very graphic blood pictures of guns and blood on a document, which is a paper that's being turned in. The teacher takes a photo of it, reports it. They reach out to the parents. The parents come to the school. And then the parents don't mention at the school that they have just purchased a gun. And the school doesn't ask for it. The school has an assessment system that they're putting into place that kind of assesses students to determine whether they're low risk, medium risk, or high risk. And there are points where he comes in at high risk, but they're still working on the system and there's no separate threat assessment done. But on November 29th, when he starts searching for ammunition, should the school have done a threat assessment on him? And what would that have taken? Would they have felt it was urgent? Because of course we know what happened on November 30th, but could they have done the threat assessment and interceded in a timely fashion to prevent a shooting? That's the question that the school will struggle with, and the people in the school will always struggle with, no matter, what determinations might be made legally or in civil courts and things like that.
Yeah.
Should there have been a threat assessment done? Would that have had an impact? What could have been done on it on November 29th, November 30th? So I'm going to end with that thought.
Thanks for listening. And if you want to know more, Catherine's book, Stop the Killing, is out now. For more details, go to catherineschweit.com. Please consider also supporting our independently made podcast. It's simple to do. Go to patreon.com/Stop the Killing. And for as little as the price of a latte a month, you can be part of the solution to stop the killing. Patreon rewards range from official do-gooder status to ad-free episodes, autographed books, and opportunities to connect with us directly for your business, school, church, or even just a book club chat. But just knowing that you are part of a movement that has the power to make your community safer, well, that's got to taste better than a skinny cappuccino any day. So please head to patreon.com/stopthekilling now and polish off your do-gooder halo and make sure to include your name so we can give you a shout out. This podcast is a Community podcast production. That's Con with an N. If you want more content, then head over to Community Podcast at Instagram, where you'll find trailers on more binge-worthy true crime, like the award-winning podcast Conning the Con. And check out our show notes for all the links mentioned. Finally, if you want one takeaway action that you can do right now that can help make our community safer, please share, rate and review this podcast wherever you listen. Everybody needs to know that they hold the keys to see something and say something. Together, we can stop the killing.
It's one of those things you hope never happens, but you better train for it, because it will happen, and it will happen in places you wouldn't expect. Be ready for it.